Good afternoon. We're back. We're going to be picking up where we left off in 1 Corinthians 8. But first, let's go ahead and begin with prayer. Blessed Lord, you have caused all the Holy Scriptures to be written for our learning. Grant that we may so hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by patience and comfort of your holy word, we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so we began a discussion last week on on 1 Corinthians chapter 8. This is the chapter where Paul begins a discussion on the casuistry of whether or not to eat food that has been sacrificed to idols. And he's going to have a couple of different ways that he's going to approach this question. And the first one is the question of how are you using your knowledge? And that the Corinthians had rightly said that the idols are meaningless. They're nothing. They're just empty statues of wood and stone and metal. And so, but from there they conclude, so why not eat? And Paul addresses, well, that's probably the wrong question to ask in this regard. And so he goes, well, so let's take it from another point of view. How do we use our knowledge is the way he starts out with. And then he's gonna take it in another couple different looks at it from a couple different angles in the following chapters. But before we get there, we got to finish chapter 8 and take a look at how he approaches that question of how do we use and our knowledge. Because knowledge can be a great thing. I'm definitely not against knowledge and such, but the fact of the matter is we do have to be aware of how we are using our knowledge. And I mean, take it from me, don't repeat the mistakes that I've made. So using knowledge rightly does matter. So okay, picking up where we are left off last time, as I get myself set here, there we go. We're going to be starting in verse 4. We didn't, as you can see, we just did not get far last week. So here we go. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven and on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So here Paul does take up a few of the points that the Corinthians are making. So we've got the idol has no real existence, and there is no God but one. These together, they form some of the Corinthian sayings. Essentially, you could say that what he's done here is go, okay, this is what you guys are claiming, and he goes, and they're right. So that these are correct insofar as what they address, that there are no other gods. Whoa, I better change how I hold my pen here. Let's copy. Yeah, there we go. That there are no other gods. So he's going, okay, you're correct. Okay, what are we going to do with this? So he begins with what basically is the common ground of the question, which in some ways is actually kind of a good idea whenever you're addressing a difference is to begin with a common ground. Maybe that's some advice I could probably listen to more myself. And so with the common ground, he goes, okay, the idols are nothing. So here's our common ground. Idols are nothing. Okay. In fact, most generally people are going to come down on this side that idols are nothing. However, there's going to be a few for whom that although the idols are nothing, they are a road best not traveled. Um, just to give you an example, I've worked with people with drug problems, and at one point I was helping out with transportation for some people going to their treatment programs. And when I would follow a route where I would pick people up and from their homes and then take them back to the treatment facility. Well, as a part of that, I would go down this one road where there was kind of like a better term, a seedy-looking hotel. And I had one client who would, every time we would start to turn down that block, would just kind of slouch down in the seat and kind of close their eyes and whatnot, because he didn't want to see that. Because to see that was to bring up thoughts and memories that they would rather not be dealing with that time, and particularly temptations, because that was a place that they would commonly go to when they, as they would say, go to party. In other words, go to use whatever their drug of choice was at the time. And so for them to be at that place was a bad idea. And we're going to find that some of the folks who have come out of the pagan religions are going to struggle with the idea that idols are nothing. And so they will agree. The idols are nothing, but, and so this is where we go from the other, where this is where we're going to proceed from the common ground. So as Paul is acknowledging that they are nothing, he's also going to acknowledge another reality. The idols may be nothing, but there are other gods and lords. And a part of that is going to be pagan converts who struggle to leave behind. Probably say people dealing with the leftovers. In other words, they're still tempted by idols. So one person could look at that idol and just keep walking. And the other person could look at that idol and go, and then they'll have almost this pathological need to go and offer a sacrifice or a prayer or something. But at the same time, and this is kind of at the root of what where Paul's going here, and that he's going, yeah, but the idols are nothing, but there are other gods and lords. And essentially what Paul is doing here is he's operating with this broad definition of God, similar to what, say, we would find in the Large Catechism, where Luther writes, a God means that from which we expect all good and to which we are to take refuge in all distress. So that to have a God is nothing else than to trust and believe him from the whole heart. As I have often said, that the confidence and faith of the heart alone make both God and an idol. So we have this issue that a God can be anything. So those idols might be nothing, but idols can be made a god. We have to be aware of this. So even as they're nothing, this is still an issue for people. For people, and in some ways, I would almost hazard a guess to say that it was actually an issue for the people who were trying to say, "Well, they're nothing." Sometimes I found that the loudest protesters are those who actually struggle with that issue. It's kind of along the lines of sometimes pastors preach about the very thing they need to hear. Um, but so Paul's going to go, okay, but we got to remember there's a broad definition of God. So we can say that there's no God but one, there, and that as they said, the idol has no real existence. But we got to go, okay, but remember, anything and everything can be made into a God. And so the reality of the fact is that some are going to be struggling with this issue. And so we got to be aware of it. So he's kind of laying the groundwork of, okay, um, he's basically starting to say, think of others and not just yourself. We got to remember we're a community. We're an interconnected group. We're not individuals. So how we talk and all that affects others, even when we think it shouldn't. And this is a case here. They think, well, just because I go and eat at the Temple of Demeter doesn't mean that I'm making somebody else. And if I'm not making them, then what does it matter? It matters because they're seeing what you're doing. And that seeing is going to lead to thoughts. And we have to be aware of those. And Paul's going to, got to be aware of it. Also, Paul is going to later include the spiritual argument, and that he mentions demons, and particularly in participating with demons. And he does relate that to the eating of temple food. And that's a reality we have to acknowledge too, is, the demonic is still active. It's been bound. We don't experience it nearly as strongly as, say, the people in court maybe. But I know folks who work over in, say, Africa and other places where witchcraft and all that is still a regular practice. You have to be aware of this because it's all around you. Now, honestly, I think part of the reason we don't face it so much is because we're weak in other ways. We're weak towards the rejection of the supernatural, and we're weak in the acceptance of materialistic rationalism. And some of the Neoplatonic ideas that have evolved with the Enlightenment and modernism, and now into postmodernism. Yes, I know I just threw off a whole bunch of philosophical words. They're different schools of thought, and a couple of them are kind of reactions to others that I named, but particularly modernism, which it was the kind of the triumph of science, and we're going to be able to solve all the all the questions in the world and all the problems with the world because of science. But postmodernism was very much a reaction to that idea because, well, it failed. But anyhow, Paul is going to remind, okay, there's also a spiritual component. We'll get into that later. So we have our common ground. Idols are nothing. God is one, and he's greater than the idols. But we got to be aware of this and how it affects people. Which brings us here. However, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brother and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So we get into that place. We're here. Not everyone is in the same place. This is a thought I think we struggle with because we all have this base assumption. And that and it never ceases to amaze me, even with most people who realize this, that everybody thinks like me. I'll see it in various degrees, in many conversations, and you can see the shock in people's eyes when they realize, wait, this person doesn't actually agree with me. I see it all the time. I even experience that wait, we don't actually agree on this. That can be something of a bit of a shock. And so Paul is recalling to the people, not everybody's in the same place. Not everybody has the same knowledge. And even people with the same knowledge, in fact, are not going to still be in the same place. And because of that, we need to be aware of the other people. Ask them, talk to them, have a relationship with them. As I hate to say it because it sounds so great, do life together. uh, and we need to operate in good faith and love. This is kind of the key right here, that we operate in good faith and in love to our neighbors. And so good faith and love towards neighbors is going to ask, okay, so brother, sister, is this a struggle for you? An example of this would be here within our own context. Our preschool was doing a raffle for a fundraiser. And there was some concern because is a raffle, gambling and such. And so we had all these questions. And well, one of the things we did is we reviewed the CTCR document on gambling and asked those tough questions. Is this going to be a problem for a neighbor? And in this case, I happen to know of a few people who were members of Gamblers Anonymous. I tend to work with the people with addiction issues at our congregation, and so I asked them, "Is this going to be a problem for you?" And when they came back and said, "No, we're good," it wasn't my thing anyways. Uh, we said, okay, we're okay. We can operate in good faith and say we're not actually going to cause offense to the brothers and sisters who have a noted weakness towards gambling. And so we could move on to a different question: is it inherently wrong for us to do that and such? So, but the point of my story is we are trying to operate in good faith towards our neighbors. We know people who are going to have issues with this particular thing, and so we don't do it. And we actually do something similar with our official activities and alcohol. And we have many members who struggle with alcoholism, and so we say we're just not going to have alcohol at church functions. The one exception being communion, because just don't want to mess with that. And but anything else like our potlucks, our church dinners, and things, we just don't do it. Um, I forgot we host a Seder and there's alcohol there, but that's another story. Anyhow, um, so we try to operate in good faith and love towards our neighbors. And I'm going to go ahead and posit this is going to have some other implications for us now, in particular with some of the questions that are coming up because of the whole legalization of same-sex marriages and things. And the way some of the laws and whatnot and rulings out of the courts are starting to fall out. Um, yeah, we may have to start asking some other questions along those lines. And how do we act in certain situations? Because we have to be aware of how we act in those situations may be affecting somebody else. And so uh, this is going to be something I know we're going to struggle with, because I've been in conversations with others, and I know they have a struggle with this because, and part of it comes back to we have a very individualistic streak in the U.S. And it's hard for us to think that, well, they're not doing anything to hurt me or to hurt others, so why should I care? And what's the big deal if I bake a cake, so to speak? Well, we have to go back to here. Okay, so you're not actually participating. Not everybody has that knowledge, and so we gotta go. Okay, how does it affect others? And at the same time, what we do, it's a part of our confession. We have this weird divide where we basically have put, um, for lack of a better term, we have this almost a real and just a big giant brick wall. I'm gonna do the best I can here and make it a brick wall, and then spiritual on this side, so that they're divided. So what ends up happening is the spiritual can't affect the real, and the real isn't going to affect the spiritual. They're just going to just keep bouncing off and going and staying in their own realms. When in reality, this wall doesn't exist. Real and spiritual are united. They're together. And so this is the real thing right here, not this over here. But we operate with this assumption that we've got the real world over here and we got the spiritual world over here, and never the twain should mix. Now, as I say this, I am also aware that just because people have put this wall between real and spiritual doesn't mean they don't think the spiritual is real. I'm just using some terms that I've seen people using here. Okay, um, that the spiritual is very much real to them, but because it's spiritual, it can't affect the physical world. So they tend to use real to mean the physical, body, table. Those are spiritual things, but real things, but spiritual things just don't affect them because the spiritual is this ephemeral thing that just is kind of there, but doesn't really can't really we can't touch it, and it can't touch us. That's kind of how it goes, and just it's kind of a weird duality, honestly. Um, and it's led us to divorcing our confession from what we do. And I know our spiritual forefathers would look at us cross-eyed, go, "What in the world are you smoking?" Of course, what we believe, the spiritual uh, interacts with the physical. They're inseparable. Probably a great view of this is Luther's teachings on vocations. And he just completely wiped out that divide and said, "Look, you know, dads being dads is an intensely spiritual thing. Um, Farmers being farmers is an intensely spiritual thing. And so what you're doing there is affected, and it goes back and forth between the two. And so that divide just doesn't exist. So we do have to be aware that what we do is a part of our confession. And because of what we do as a part of our confession, we have to be aware of what we do, how it affects our brother's view. Are we given the appearance of approving of sin? Um, and at the same time, we have to be aware of how the world views things. Are we promoting sin? And with what we do, even if we have this knowledge that tells us, well, I'm not actually really doing either or, we have to be aware that not everybody thinks like us. I mean, this was a discussion that I had with somebody about baking cakes in same-sex marriage. They're like, "Well, I know I'm not participating in their wedding, and that I don't approve of what they're doing, but I'm still going to bake a cake." And I was like, I, I was like, that's not something you can actually know. And how often are you going to find that people, because you're doing something that they wanted you to do, are going to think that you actually agree with what they're doing? And we have to be aware of that, and we have to ask that question. Um, so we have to ask: Are we promoting sin in the world's eyes, even if the world doesn't say it's a sin? That we're saying that, well, these things are actually okay despite what everything else is taught in Scripture. So in the case of the Corinthians, it was not eating food to idols, and then they were eating food to idols, and well. People could go either as well. Then the Christians are real hypocrites. They don't actually believe what they teach, and, and they just want to have a good time anyways, and maybe a bit of fire insurance, or they're going to go, oh well, I guess they actually are polytheistic or something along those lines. And so we do have to be aware of those. And so it goes back to, while it is true that we're saved by faith, not by the food on our dinner plate, it is also true that what we do affects others and ourselves. So we need to be aware of what we're doing and that we're not leading people astray. Uh, and essentially, we basically need to remember Jesus said that it is better to tie a millstone around your neck and throw yourself into the sea than to lead a little one astray. Essentially, what Paul's doing here is applying that idea here. He's going, it's better for us not to lead people astray. And whoa, I didn't realize that was my last slide there. I thought I had more. Okay. But anyhow, we're at the end of our discussion, and as it is, so I'm going to be wrapping it up here. But basically, at this is the end of the subject section. He goes, okay, so I'm aware of what I do, I'm aware of what my neighbor is, and for my neighbor's sake, because I love my neighbor, I'm not going to do it. So that's where he's going to have his sub-conclusion here. And he is gonna continue the topic, but he's gonna start approaching it from a different point of view, as he's going to give an apostolic example, so to speak here. And with that, I'm going to draw us to a close because I'm out of time and I've got chapel services here. So with that, blessings to you all. Hope to see you again next week. And if you got questions, I may have answers, so don't hesitate to ask them. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and get all those great notifications. And with that, blessings, and see you next week.